Well, hello and welcome to Insight with Political Tours and Beyond the Headlines. In mid-October 2016, opinion polls had Hillary Clinton ahead in the swing state of Wisconsin by almost 7 points. On election night, Donald Trump won it by close to a point. In 3 weeks' time, the Republicans are hoping that that reversal of fortune will repeat itself again and help to secure Donald Trump a second term in the White House. Our guests tonight appear to have a tough job on their hands. They are Mark Jefferson, Executive Director of the Wisconsin GOP. Hello, Mark.
Hi, glad to be with you. Thanks for reaching out.
And we also have Heather Smith, the Policy Director with the party and a consultant on the campaign. Hello, Heather.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you both very much for joining us. Wisconsin is fascinating, I think, not just because it's a crucial swing state, but also because there's a clear divide between the urban and the rural, and that reflects the Democratic and Republican divide during this election. And also because it's a good indicator of Republican voter retention. If Donald Trump can't keep his white non-college votes up here, he's in trouble across the country. At least that's my analysis. Is that a fair thing to say, Mark, do you think?
I think it is. And what you see in Wisconsin is probably a higher proportion of the electorate falls in that category in Wisconsin than it does in states like Michigan and Pennsylvania, to which Wisconsin is often compared, especially in terms of the close margins that all three states had last time around. So with a slightly higher proportion of the electorate that fall in that category, I think a lot of people consider Wisconsin to be perhaps the most likely of the three states to stay in Trump's column.
Right, okay. Just to remind everyone, you've got a population of 5.8 million people. You've got 10 votes in the Electoral College. And in a moment, we're going to go through the different areas of the state, the different sort of voting blocks, if you like. But just to start with, let's remind ourselves of where the national polls are. We'll bring up the first of our slides here so that we can see what's going on. And we saw this earlier. We had a session on Monday looking at the polls overall, and they really haven't changed in the past few days. You can see that Joe Biden is predicted to get 279 electoral college votes, and that within those polls we can see that definitely Wisconsin is leaning towards Biden. Let's just go on to the next one, and this is really important, I think. As I said in the intro, Hillary Clinton had a 6.7 point lead on the 12th of October. So not far off from the election day. She thought she had a clear chance of winning the state. And then, as we said, Donald Trump won it by a percentage, almost about 1 point. Let's go on to the next one. This is where we are at the moment, with Biden up by 6.1. Marcus, do we have anything more on those? Are you seeing any other polls? Anything else that suggests something different?
In terms of the public polling, that is about what I see as well. I think it's very comparable to what we saw 4 years ago, frankly. And yes, it seems to be on par with that again.
Right. And Heather, just to give put some optimism in it for you, what do the polls miss out on here, and particularly in Wisconsin?
I'm sorry, what was that?
I was just asking Heather, what do the polls miss out on here, particularly in Wisconsin? Heather, what do you think? I mean, how did they get it wrong last time?
I mean, I think it's a variety of things. I think that people, the more divisive that things have become, and I don't think this is just true of Wisconsin, but I do think it is certainly true here. The more divisive things have become, people get into their tribes and they don't want to share information with other people. I do think that there were people who just didn't want to give information on polls, and I would say that, not as a matter of like an embarrassment matter, but just as the vast majority of aggressively, bullying is a strong word, but like bullying behavior tended to be aimed toward people who supported Trump, because, he's a buffoon and you must be therefore a buffoon as well if you support him. And I think that sort of led a lot of people to just say, I'm going to disengage. I'm not going to talk. I'm not going to tell you. I might answer your questions right on a survey, or I might not answer your questions right on a survey, or I might just hang up. I think that's it.
Okay, well, the predictions are this time around that the voter turnout on all sides is going to be particularly high. Let's go on and have a look at Wisconsin as a state, and then this is all new for me. I'm not familiar with this territory at all, so it's an uphill learning curve for me, steep learning curve. We've got, I think you're talking about 4 key geographic areas, and I think we'll take the next slide now. And I think if you two can play tag on this one, so perhaps Mark, you can talk about the 3rd congressional district. What kind of area is it? What kind of voters make up in that area?
Yes, we can probably tag team pretty effectively on this area, given it is the area where both of us happen to grow up. I grew up on a farm in the central part of Wisconsin. Heather is from the far western part of this district in La Crosse area. I would describe it as heavily agricultural. Towards the eastern part of that district, you get more of a German influence. In the northeastern tip is a more Polish influence. The Polish community tends to vote a little bit more Democratic. Over in Heather's old stomping grounds, also heavily agricultural, but much more Scandinavian, much more swing voters, much more independent-minded voters there. You don't see people who are much like the rest of Wisconsin, but I would argue more so, not into formalities, and not necessarily people who are, I don't know, I guess I would call it salt of the earth type of folks is probably about the best description I could give.
So it's rural with a twist, so it's not as you'd expect. And I was looking back at the numbers. So this is an area that voted for Obama, but also voted for Trump.
That's exactly right. Independent-minded people, and lots of times people now are thinking rurals as solid Republicans. This is something else. Heather?
Yeah, I would say that more than any other region, even though it's, more than any other region of the state, I would say it is doggedly determined to cherish their independence. There is nobody who is going to tell anybody you have to fit into, some kind of a mold. And the more that you push that on them, many of them, the harder it is for them to decide that they're gonna, the more they're gonna push back. I come from a completely apolitical family that is probably slightly embarrassed that I have chosen a side. That's just not what you do. You don't choose a side.
Excellent. Okay, well, that's great. Let's go on to the next slide and see the next area. So this is a really interesting area because it's had a huge amount of money thrown at it, Mark, hasn't it? It
certainly has. This is an area where when President Obama was running the first time in 2008, and even back to 2006 when you had the Iraq war really dragging down Republicans, this area went against Republicans in a big way in 2006 and 2008, and has been pretty strong for Republicans though ever since. Catholicism is big here. We refer to it often as the land of the Catholic deer hunter. This is cultural conservatism. In the South, you have a lot of Protestant conservatives. German heritage is big here. You also have pockets of strong Dutch influence as well. This is an area that Republicans have to be strong in. They won in Brown County, which is the Green Bay area, by double digits. The Appleton area, Outagamie County, also by double digits. They need to maintain that type of strength again to win.
Yeah, and former manufacturing as well?
Absolutely. Manufacturing is important all the way from Green Bay to Oshkosh and south. In the north, you get more into timber country. Tourism is important, but manufacturing, and these are suburban voters as well, so they will swing a little bit as well.
Mm. So Heather, the crucial thing is that you don't want to lose votes in either the western area we were talking about, and particularly this area as well.
Right. This area is a little easier, I would say, for us.
Right. Okay. Okay. Great. Let's go on to the next area. We're whittling through this now. Milwaukee, it's urban, solidly Democratic. Is that right, Mark?
It is. It's losing population. You see growth in the areas directly connected to Milwaukee of the population moving out, and those areas that were solidly Republican in a generation past have become steadily more Democratic. Heavy African-American influence. The economy has been a problem there, but President Trump has worked this area in ways that other Republicans have not. Now, our former governor, Scott Walker, was a little stronger in this area because this was his home area. He lived just outside the city. He was a county executive there, and he did a little bit better than most Republicans. But President Trump has also done better. His anti-establishment ways, his independent thinking. The campaign has reached out more to minorities than Republicans past. And our attitude is, if we can cut a little bit into the margins here, and we're confident we can really help our statewide numbers.
Heather, I suppose last time round, Hillary was the candidate, and she just wasn't that popular, particularly under African Americans. And
wasn't as present either. I mean, I think it's a combination of the things. She wasn't particularly popular, but I think she probably could have made some inroads if she had been around a little bit more.
Yeah. And you've got to say this time round, I mean, this is where we can talk about Black Lives Matter. We can talk about what happened in Kenosha. There are issues now that are going to really bring out the black vote in ways that they haven't been there before.
Potentially, but we have an office in Milwaukee that we haven't had before. And we've had a lot of folks come up to us and say, now, wait a minute, well, tell me about defunding the police, because, yeah, I think they go too far in a lot of cases. Racism is a problem. I think they need reforms, but who's going to protect us? What's going on here? If we don't have people still working our neighborhoods, they're a little bit fearful as to what the community could be in store for. So I wouldn't expect a dramatic shift in margins based on that alone.
I guess you're talking about two things there. You're talking about something that's going to bring out the African-American vote, and there's clear indication that that's the case. Voter numbers are expected to be substantially up on 2016, and then perhaps a fear in more conservative areas, the reaction to that.
But also in swing areas. I mean, some of the neighborhoods that have the highest crime rates are among the most concerned. And so they're still going to be overwhelmingly Democrat. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that they aren't, but I'm going to maybe push back a little bit on the notion that the margins are going to be dramatically higher.
Okay, let's move on again to the last one, the WOW counties. Now, we on Monday we had the data analyst Dante Cini, who works with the Wall Street Journal and NBC. And he says, you've got to ask them about Waukesha County. Have I got the pronunciation right?
Waukesha County.
Waukesha, there we go.
Heather, you want to, or you want me to take it first? Or
So I think Waukesha is an area, and Mark may have a slightly different take on it, but Waukesha is an area that has been changing over time. And I think that it has been an area that Republicans have taken for granted over time because it has been solidly, with us along with all three of the WOWs. But it has been changing, and I think that it is an area that has been very difficult for Republicans to kind of get their heads around how to deal with that change, because a lot of the old guard Republicans have really not sort of wrapped their head around how different things look in the area.
I think that's a really fascinating point, because you're referring to more traditional Republicans, conservatives with a small c. Is that right?
Sure. Yep. And I think that, you know, people are always talking suburban moms, that kind of vote, the families in those areas are more or less affluent, comparatively, and certainly comparative to the city. But they're also just trending slightly more, slightly away from some of the more bedrock conservative, focus on business, and they're a little more focused on softer issues. And I think that it's just been real difficult for the people who have been in the seats in the legislature, for a long time, to kind of get their heads around that.
Okay, I mean, Heather, I think you're one of the few women within the leadership of the party within the state. Is that right?
Yep.
Why is that? I mean, is that typically, I mean, you're not going to suggest that's the same throughout the Republican Party across the states?
I think that there aren't tons of women on the Dem side either, slightly more. I mean, I think when you look when I'm on the political side, a lot fewer women. When I'm on the policy side, and I am, I've worked for Governor Walker in the administration, and I've worked in the legislature. There are a lot more women. The chief of staff for the speaker is a woman. I'm the policy director. I mean, there are a lot more women on that side. It's harder to break in on the political side, I would say, for Democrats and Republicans. I've spoken with other women on the Dem side who say the same thing. It's just harder to break in, and you have to be aggressive. And when you're aggressive, that's not always entirely popular.
Okay. Well, thank you both very much. We've whistled through the sort of the geography, and we'll get now into the issues. I want people to start putting their questions into the box, into the Q&A box. I can see one in there already, but if we can get a few more coming, we'll begin to open up the microphones shortly. This has been an election campaign dominated by COVID, and Wisconsin itself has been hit really hard by the virus. How does that play out among the different electoral groups? I'm really thinking about the more vulnerable members of the population, Mark.
I think it feels like it has come close to taking over the campaign in the last two to 3 weeks. We've seen a spike here in Wisconsin that some other states had gone through earlier. So it's dominating the media right now here in the state. And it has been challenging to get back to talking about some of the other issues that we want to talk about. We do better when we talk about the economy. We do better when we talk about law and order and structure. On the COVID, I think we have done a poor job of talking about the things that President Trump did early on in terms of restricting travel, that he did in the face of Democratic opposition, that we believe saved a lot of lives. But I think the personality has dominated it. So it's hurting us, I would say, with seniors, and it's hurting us with suburban women. And so a lot of our focus is to reach out to them and talk about the things that we have done and plan to do. Point out the fact that the agenda that the Biden campaign is pushing is really just a restatement of what Trump is doing now. So we need to do a better job of messaging on that issue. Heather, you have some pretty strong feelings on this issue as well.
Yeah, go on, Heather.
Yeah, I think at the legislative level, I think that we have just, as Republicans, done an abysmal job on this issue. And in fact, I really honestly think that President Trump had a much better early response, and then it kind of fluctuated around and was so inconsistent as to have harmed them. But I think that we have gotten bogged down at the legislative level in discussions that don't have anything to do with really people's livelihoods or their health. And those are the two things that I think people care about. And we find ourselves talking far too much about whether the Constitution allows the state health secretary to have X, Y, or Z power, and it's been kind of ridiculous, frankly, and it's hurting us. And I don't it's interesting because you always talk about coattails coming from above, but I do not think that how we have responded at the legislative level is helpful to the president.
Okay, so what should you be doing? What messages are you trying to get across to suburban women in particular?
That we, I mean, from a legislative standpoint, I guess that we actually are interested in making sure that people stay healthy, that we don't discount this as a disease, that we also have to focus on how we manage to keep people employed and keep businesses going, because there are people in a number of different businesses. We're a state that is heavily dependent on tourism, and we're losing businesses that are never going to come back. And other service industries and things like that. And as you continue to lose employees, it has, and employers, it has an outsized impact on government spending as well. I'm the former Medicaid director in the state, and we've already got a fifth of our population, which is about standard across the country, about 20% of people on Medicaid. But you expand those Medicaid rolls, and it's not only more expensive for the people who are still employed and paying taxes, but the more people that you have on Medicaid, the farther you drive up private insurance costs. So there are all kinds of outsized economic impacts that go along with this that we need to be thinking about and planning for.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to bring in some questions in a second. Surely the battle for the Supreme Court must have rallied some of the base and also made a difference to some for people who are, religious. I mean, Mark, this must be a positive factor for you.
It is, I would say, especially in the last region that you spoke about, the WOW counties, Waukesha County, Washington, and Ozaukee County. This suburb is a little bit different than maybe any other suburbs in America, where in most states, the suburbs represent the swing areas. In Wisconsin, that represented our solid base, where we put up the margins and then built from there. So this realignment that's taking place in the state and across America has cut into our base area, not just made the swing area a problem. And so when you break down those counties, in 2016, I think it's instructive to look at the election results again, where Ron Johnson, our Republican U.S. Senator, was on the ballot at the same time as Donald Trump. Ron Johnson put up a margin of 27,000 votes more than Donald Trump. It was 7,000 votes more in Ozaukee County. It was 5,000 votes more in Washington County. And that tells you that they're open to, they're still very interested in traditional conservatism and traditional Republican values. And Donald Trump has brought about this realignment and hasn't necessarily been a traditional Republican. And this issue is something that brings those people back potentially. And so we need to focus on that. Her Catholic roots will play well in the Fox Valley. And those are the areas where we really need to push this issue.
I think it's absolutely fascinating, because essentially they don't see Donald Trump as a proper Republican, do they?
There's a lot of things that Donald Trump brings to the table that have excited Republicans and voters across Wisconsin that have turned off people in that part of the state. And I think I would take that trade-off, because he was able to pull something off in 2016 that a Republican hasn't done since 1984, and that's win the state. But there are places that suffered because of it.
I mean, Heather, this is a huge question, further ahead, because how do you bring these two parts of the party together? And this may be, if President Trump does lose the election, I guess that's the key question.
I mean, in many ways, Wisconsin is a story of, we have a number of small cities, and we have a lot of rural areas, and then we have a few big cities. And in really a lot of the division line comes about really that the big cities are in one pocket and everybody else is in the other one. And the suburbans are the ones who kind of do the swinging back and forth. And, I think that it's a story, it's really a story of the city versus everybody else. And I think that the whole Black Lives Matter thing, to take back onto something that Mark said, is there are people in rural parts of the state who don't experience any kinds of the level of crime that our larger cities do. But you see in polls that it is a huge concern for them. They're not concerned for themselves, but they're concerned for what it means for the state. And it worries them, and especially worries older people. And I think that's one of those issues where we could have people 6-8 hours away from the Kenosha, riots, and they're really worried about what's going on. And so, I mean, there's always been this push and pull between the cities. The cities are always saying we don't get enough, and the rural people are always saying all we do is throw money at you in the cities. And that's part of the dynamic, I think.
But I guess the suburbs are growing, and so that complicates the picture. And so that the battleground is not just between the urban center and the rural areas. You've got a large bit of space in between that make up. And I was looking at sort of the demographics. I think if you look at urban and suburban areas, suburban areas, it's about 91 million voters. It's a huge number. It's a huge number. So maybe the picture's even more complicated. Let's bring in some questions now. Caroline Sumnall, followed by Fran Hoffman. Caroline, I think you had your question partially answered, but go ahead and get those two in. Go on, Caroline.
So I had two questions. One was whether left-wing violence would impact the election. And secondly, whether Trump having COVID would impact the election.
So I think we talked a bit about the violence just with Heather's answer just now. But Mark, do you want to deal with COVID, the president actually having COVID?
I think in the short term, it had an effect. Whether it is long-term and can carry all and carries all the way to the election remains to be seen. I compare the last 2 weeks that we've experienced here in the presidential election, because they have been significant and potentially there was a little movement in that race. But it also may be comparable to 2012, where in early October, Mitt Romney scored a decisive victory over Barack Obama. The polls moved in his favor. People were fired up. It looked like we were on again, and this thing was going to be a fight to the finish. And then over the last couple of weeks, it settled into where it was before. And I kind of wonder if things like the president's COVID and some of the other issues that we had, his debate performance that happened roughly at the same time, just a little before, aren't just temporary. What I worry about from our standpoint more than that is probably the spike we've had here in this state in COVID and how that's taken over the news cycle.
Okay, Heather, on the question about the violence as well. I mean, just to sort of, I mean, Caroline was quite specific about that being, that left one. When you think of Portland, you think of Oregon, that was dragging on for a very long period of time, and that must have had an impact, at least for the short term. But maybe that's died off now.
Yep, I think that's exactly right. I think in the short term, it was something that was. I mean, there's a term that people throw around here in the Midwest, and it's Wisconsin nice, and that we're kind of nice people, and we don't like bad things, and burning down things and destroying buildings is bad, and we kind of just aren't uncomfortable with that. And so I think that it was really sort of distressing for a lot of people, and I think that it was something that for while it was going on, and while it seemed like it was every few weeks, and I mean, I think a specific example is in fourth grade, when kids are in fourth grade here, they all come and visit the state capitol and they do their little, social studies stuff. And there are a couple of really famous statues that we have on our Capitol Square. One is from a Norwegian immigrant who was an abolitionist. And another was a statue called Lady Forward, who women fundraised to the money to make the statue, which was made by a woman, was raised by all women, in the 1800s. And so very famous, very, great statues. They were defaced, pulled apart, beheaded, thrown in the lake, dragged through the streets. Those are statues that every kid who goes to public school in the state for generations have gone and seen. And when you see that they're spray painted and that they've ripped the head off of them and that kind of stuff, that's disturbing. And I think that for some time when that was going on in various cities was really powerful, and it was really distressing for people. I do think it's died off because, you know, news cycles are news cycles, right? And I do think it's died off. As to the president's COVID, I mean, to me, and you know, honestly, we've got a couple of old men running for president, and old men don't change their personalities, right? I mean, they are who they are, and, you know, love them or leave them, right? But I think that it would have been an opportunity for him, especially in a state like this where we are having a spike. My sister works in a nursing home. My mom lives in a nursing home, and it's, you know, it's a concern. It's a big deal for a lot of people to be able to show some empathy in his own way, right? I mean, he was sick, his wife was sick, he got to experience it. I think it would have been an opportunity. Maybe he'll have the chance to express that, and maybe he can. I think that if he took advantage of that, that might be nice. I don't know if it's in him.
Yeah.
He's just a personality unto himself.
Yeah. Okay. Let's take Fran Hoffman, and then after that we'll take Anna Logan. So Fran, if you go ahead, go on, Fran.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I have two questions now, and one has to do with where Wisconsin is in terms of early voting opportunities. One striking piece of reporting I heard today is that a couple of states that have early voting and mail-in voting are recording a third of their electorate has already voted. So the question of what happens between now and Election Day becomes less and less relevant because, in fact, the votes are coming in large numbers. And I'm curious to know where Wisconsin is in that. But my other question has to do with Foxconn, which is Wisconsin specific, and it's related to Trump's campaign promises around improving manufacturing jobs in the United States. And you in Wisconsin are receiving a lot of national attention. I'm in DC, I read about you all the time. And the Foxconn controversy, big promises of lots of manufacturing. Trump was really on that bandwagon for a long time. That is now seems to be eroding. Is that affecting people's early enthusiasm for Trump in 2016 and changing their minds in 2020?
Okay, Mark, just for those of us who don't know about Foxconn, please can you explain that to start with? And then give me a question.
The Foxconn is a high-tech manufacturing facility that has been planned for the Racine area, just a half hour south of Milwaukee. Tremendous investment was promised from Taiwan. It has gotten off the ground significantly slower than promised. Heather has been probably a little closer to that issue, but from a political standpoint, I would say about Foxconn that manufacturing in the United States isn't what it used to be. And in a lot of ways, we haven't come up with how to make up for those lost manufacturing jobs. And a lot of what Foxconn represented to people was an attempt to bring in a technological development and get with changing times and take a chance on investing in a manufacturing plant that could revolutionize things over time. And so people felt it was worth the risk. There was a lot of investment and a lot of government investment in it, although it was on a graduating scale, right? So if the jobs weren't there, if the investment wasn't there from the private company, there would be less government involvement as well. Right now, my view of it is largely a wash and overshadowed by a lot of other things in this election cycle. And to the early vote point, here in Wisconsin, we are, I think at last check, off the top of my head, I want to say we're just shy of 700,000 early votes turned in out of what will be somewhere just north of 3 million total votes cast, so a little over what, 20%, pushing 25% of the votes in at this point. A couple observations on that. They tend to be Democratic by 15 to 20 points. These are people who have been dying to vote against President Trump. The good news for us is that their vote only counts once, no matter when it's cast. So from that standpoint, I'm less concerned. I think more independent voters are probably going to wait. Ballots have been out there since mid-September. Early voting in person will start next Tuesday in this state and run up through the following Friday before the election. That's a little shorter window than we've had in the past because they were held up in the courts, but that's about on par with what other states offered, somewhere in the middle on average. And I also would point out on the early votes, what you tend to get are people who vote in nearly every election anyway. So I don't see it as quite the game changer that a lot of observers do. If you voted in 3 or 4 of the past November, past 4 November elections, and you cast your ballot early, there's a very good chance you knew who you were going to vote for a long time ago, and that you were going to vote anyway. And so I just don't see it as a massive change in the landscape.
Okay, Heather, I'm very interested in Foxconn because we're looking at Luzerne County tomorrow in Pennsylvania, and they've got new jobs coming in from tech, but it doesn't replace the old jobs. Basically, if you've lost your job or you're in manufacturing and in your late 40s or in your 50s, you're not going to get a job, writing software or producing a computer. So how does it matter? It's a symbolic loss, but how do you see that?
So I mean, I don't think, and I certainly don't hope, that the Foxconn story has reached its end at this point. I do think that that's an area of the state that was really hard. The southeast corner of the state, and from Janesville, which means nothing to anybody, but Racine, Kenosha over there, that was an area that was really hard hit when manufacturing jobs were gone. There are shuttered factories all over in that area, and so I think that while from the outside, I think that you would read stories about people being like, oh my God, this is the worst thing in the world, and how can you do that? But people in the area were so supportive. Of course, not everyone, right? But so supportive because it was an opportunity to bring jobs back so that people could have their kids stay in an area. If they weren't going away to school, they could have a good job that would support their families, and that would be something that would develop along in the future. I think it's been a very odd few years, and with who could have predicted any of this stuff this year, right? Hopefully they can kind of get back on track. I don't think that it's particularly been hurtful. I mean, it's one of those things that has just been ultra tribalized, right? People who don't like it and want to criticize Republicans say, oh, well, you gave them $4 billion. And that's completely not true. All of the tax benefits and everything else were structured based on they had to have hit a production or they didn't get it. And frankly, they've missed a lot of the goals that they had set. So they're not getting those benefits. And so it's sort of been portrayed differently, I think, than what it really is. But what it really is right now is not much is happening there. And so hopefully the story ends up being told in a way that's positive for those people in those areas. Especially because of the job losses that we've had across the state, if they can manage to get themselves up and running and be hiring people, that is going to be a net positive for us, because we've lost businesses that won't be back because of COVID.
Absolutely. Okay, Anna Logan, who is in Australia. Anna, unplug your microphone. We're ready. Go ahead. Far away.
Heather has partially answered this question now, but what puzzles me, Heather, is how you think you can persuade people. You said you would like the legislators to spend more time persuading the people that they're really concerned about their lives, their health, and their livelihoods. But how can you persuade them that the Republicans are concerned about their lives, their health rather, when President Trump is all over the place, exposing himself when he's still really, not, as far as we know, not out of his contagious period yet? Are people not concerned about that?
So I guess I'd say, and I will take this just from a broader population of the state kind of standpoint. depending on where you go in the state, and I want to say this as non-judgmentally as I possibly can on all counts. Depending on where you are, people really believe very different things. And I think that there are, you know, in some of the more rural areas of the state, very low populated counties, they didn't have cases for months on end. And to them, it was, we've shut down my livelihood, we've shut down my business, and I don't even, there's nobody in this entire county or the county bordering me that has it. And so, right or wrong, and I'm not, I mean, I try to understand people where they are and not where I wish they were. Right or wrong, a lot of those people just developed the idea that their livelihoods, their jobs were being destroyed for something that wasn't impacting them. And if it wasn't impacting them, it didn't seem real. And I think that, you know, we've had it spread across different parts of the state, but I do think that some of that still has held on. And, you know, people, one of the more unfortunate things, you know, and I sound like an old lady now, but one of the more unfortunate things is that when I first got involved in politics, there was more discussion, and people could move their position without having it be the end of the world. And now on either side, people get in their tribe and they can never change their position because they feel like they lose face. And it's so destructive to getting anything done and really hitting the right policies that you need for people in an issue like this, where it matters economically, it matters for people's health, it matters for, you know, it touches everything. And we can't get anywhere because people are in their corners and they can't and won't understand one another.
I guess Trump is such a polarizing figure. We saw him speak to a rapturous response in Des Moines, Iowa, and he could sort of do no wrong. It was like a sort of a mixture of a get-rich-quick convention and an evangelical preacher. But he certainly turns off a lot of voters. And this comes to Lynn Maddox's question, which was picking up on what Mark was just saying earlier. Lynn, do you want to go ahead and ask your question? Go on, Lynn.
Thanks, Nicholas. Mark, you said that the realignment across the country has cut into your base, not just your swing vote. Given how close Wisconsin was last time, what are the implications?
Wisconsin is interesting in the sense that the margins have shifted dramatically as to where Republicans and Democrats put up their margins. A generation ago, the Madison area and the Milwaukee area in Wisconsin were not nearly as strong Democratic as they are now. The rural areas were split between the Republicans and Democrats throughout the 90s. Northern Wisconsin, Congressman Dave Obey had that area, a Democrat for 40 years, unchallenged, couldn't be touched. And the suburban areas were the rock for Republicans. All of this shifting has been dramatic in those regions, and yet the numbers in Wisconsin remain roughly the same. If the electoral college is close, Wisconsin is close. And it's just a matter of where those votes come from. This cycle, I haven't seen, there have been signs at points during this cycle that, again, we thought last time around we couldn't grow our margins anymore in rural Wisconsin. And it seems that we are on pace to do that. We may be on pace to lose a little more in the suburban areas that are going to offset that a little bit. I expect that the story of Wisconsin is going to be what it has been so far in every presidential election this century. If the electoral college is close, Wisconsin will be extraordinarily close. 5,000 votes separated George W. Bush and Al Gore here in 2000. 12,000 votes separated George W. Bush and John Kerry in 2004. Obama won pretty strong wins in the electoral college twice and won solid wins here in the state. Close one last time and a close one here in Wisconsin. So that's our story. And I don't think the larger picture has changed. It's just dramatically different as to how we get there.
Can you just talk about in the west of the state, and I mean, I guess among the sort of blue collar workers, I mean, it's difficult to sort of pin that down to one geographic area, but I was looking at polls that said that Biden had a possibly a 9 or 10 point lead in the western area we were looking at earlier.
Yeah, I would be hard pressed to believe that that happens again. We looked at the first map that we looked at earlier in this presentation was the 3rd Congressional District, where Trump won by 4 points. I know the polls suggest he's down a lot there. We have, we have some internal stuff that suggests it's very different there. He still remains strong in the rural areas, but they are independent-minded voters. And if you talk about some of the areas where the polling maybe isn't as accurate for some of the reasons that we've already discussed, I think this might be one of the geographic areas where that holds.
Yeah. Lynn, do you want to come back to that? Do you feel you got an answer to your question?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting, but I mean, I keep hearing that that Trump is finding behind on a range of things, particularly with COVID. And I guess I'm wondering that any cutting of the base vote or any anti-COVID thing makes Wisconsin a much more likely Democrat take than a Republican take.
Yeah. Okay, well, that leads us into Nigel Harley's question. I can't see everyone's name. Yeah, Nigel's up there. So Nigel, if you want to open your microphone, just go ahead.
Hello, yes. I think, both Mark and Heather are painting a picture of really quite independent-minded voters in Wisconsin. But I'm wondering what is the real key, the key thing that attracts people to Trump in the state? What is that special thing that, voters go for?
No,
Go on, Heather.
go ahead, Heather. All right, beat
We
me
will
to it.
probably have slightly similar and slightly different answers. For me, and again, I look back at my family and friends, and in that 3rd district, and I go back to the urban versus rural tug of war that we always have. That I think people have felt for a long time in rural Wisconsin. And, it's one of the things that you mentioned at the top about people who only, don't have a college degree and that kind of thing. I think that there has been this increasing sort of feel in rural areas that, if you don't have a college degree, all you have to do is work and pay your taxes to pay those, pay for those people in the suburbs to have their fancy stuff or whatever. And there is this, and it's a little bit of a class thing. But I think that that has been exacerbated in ways that I find really striking, because as we talk about, trying to be more accepting of people and things like that, there is this idea that anybody that would support Trump is fair game to be mocked for being, an idiot. And, oh, look at you, you don't have a college degree, so you can't possibly think well enough to think your way through to someone. And I think what he is that kind of guy that you really are not all that comfortable with, but by God, he's probably going to be the one who's going to go to bat for you, because all the rest of them are just going to be the smooth talking, feed you your lines, send you a little spin your way, get your vote, and then ignore you again. And I think that that's the appeal that he has for those people who have felt increasingly like that they get to be the butt of everybody's joke. And there are a lot of salt of the earth people in this state who aren't super educated, but are good, smart people, and they're looking for a champion.
I guess it's an obvious thing to say, but it's a national election, and so it's for people within the states to vote. But if you're looking at the states from outside, I can't think of any other president who's had such negative rates internationally. And if we look at the United States leadership within the world, I think most people are pretty, certainly in in Western democracies, I think have been pretty appalled by the United States leadership during the last 4 years. So I don't think that plays out.
Talk about that.
I don't think that plays out so much within the US vote, Mark.
Well, to your point, I think that kind of, in some ways, to tie the last two comments, Heather's and yours, together, Wisconsin has more than its fair share of veterans. Wisconsin, though, tends to not want excessive entanglement in international affairs. I think this is an anti-establishment state, and just because we've always done a thing a certain way does not mean that we are compelled to do it that way forever. This is a state that also kind of occasionally latches on to personalities, and has from time to time. It's a state that went for Richard Nixon 3 times. It went for Nixon over Kennedy in 1960, and both times he won when he won the presidency. It is a state that I think are fair-minded voters trying to do the right thing across the board, whatever your economic status or wherever you live. They're trying to be fair-minded, but we've had a little more division than other states. Scott Walker and those union fights were 5 years before Trump. So we've had some of this tribal stuff going on in this state longer than a lot of states in the country. So it's not particularly new to us. And I don't think we feel particularly persuaded by some of the cultural centers of the country, like California and New York. I don't think they give a darn what the folks there feel. And there's also a very final point, very low faith in our institutions right now. And I think that's across the country, whether it's the media and the press, politicians and government, for the reasons Heather just articulated, and sometimes even our universities, that kind of suggesting to people there really isn't a place for your point of view right now. And people are getting a little tired of that.
Okay, I guess the Republicans have also had a blow though earlier this year, or was it late last year, with Scott Walker losing the governorship and the Democrats winning there.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that, that was also a close one. I think it's been fascinating to watch the new governor, try to find his way through this. I think he was shocked on his own that he won, quite honestly, and has said so in interviews. And so he has had a rough go of it, trying to get his feet under him. And of course, dealing with COVID was not going to be easy, no matter who was in that seat. It is an unenviable position to be in. I'm sure they could have done better, but I don't know that I could point to a state and say that somebody magically did it right. But they've had their fair share of struggles, and I think that it's going to be a difficult reelect for him, because, I mean, his fault or not his fault, when your economy is falling apart, and you've been seen as kind of a weak and ineffective governor, that's going to hurt him.
Okay. We've just over 5-6 minutes left. So we've got time for a few more questions. Simon Jackson. Simon, go ahead.
Jump forward to 2024. If it were down to you, would you like the next Republican candidate to be as divisive as Trump, or will the time by then have come to pour oil on troubled waters? Or does that depend entirely on how it plays out this time?
Go on, Mark.
I think I would like some of the traits that the current president brings to the table in the following election cycle as well. I don't think President Trump, one way or another, will not be running again in 24, but I'm not sure Trumpism goes away. There is, politics evolve, right? It seemed like in the 1990s, with President Clinton here in America, things were good and peace and prosperity, but there wasn't a big difference between the parties. There wasn't a real sense of purpose either. 9/11 changed a lot of that, and maybe some of the sources of division started then as to how we go about it. But politics have changed, no matter how you look at it, to the point where we are more tribal than we've ever been. But we've also lost that confidence in institutions that President Trump has come along and pointed the finger at, sometimes deservedly so, perhaps sometimes not. But the willingness of a leader of our party to do that is still going to be important to our party. And maybe they can be a little more you put it, maybe the perspective that needs to be respected. And I hope that we don't read people as numbers. We had no interest in connecting with voters, and it showed at the polls. And I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. We're just going to slip in a couple more questions here. Andy Mendes, you've got multiple questions. Try and keep them short. Go ahead, Andy.
I think Mark sort of partly addressed the question about the media. As a man living in the UK, I still just about believe the BBC, but it's depressing that the BBC has to fact check statements by the president and by our glorious prime minister, because basically they both lie. And I wondered whether you think there's any genuine unbiased media or sources of information left in the States. And then, because you both seem to be puzzling that you're supporting the president, but what would you find the least appealing aspect of the president? And please do one of you mention his climate change denial as being absolute reason for not supporting him ever. Thank you.
Heather, do you want to
start, Heather? Go ahead.
So yep, the party is gonna have to find their way to understanding a little bit more about the environment than they do right now. And I don't think we've done a very good job of that. I think I'm trying to remember what the first part of the question was.
Is there any source of media?
And
the
part of it is faith in political leaders, and then the other thing is faith in institutions and in the media as well, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know that I believe that there is any unbiased source of media, and I don't think that any of our elected leaders do anything, work very hard at making sure that they're trying to do anything other than complain about it, right? I mean, you can be a voice for honesty in your own world, and I guess I would just say it isn't just President Trump. It's not just the Prime Minister. You know, it cuts across all parties.
Okay. Can I ask you both what papers you read and what media you watch or listen to? Heather, to start with, then Mark, very quickly.
Well, I have seen absolutely zero news for the past about 2 weeks because I am in the thick of producing a bunch of mail. But on a regular basis, I guess I read the Atlantic pretty regularly. And then I kind of skip around. I cannot bear to listen to Fox or MSNBC, or I mean, I just feel like sitting and listening to any of our major news stations makes you lose your IQ, you know, precipitously. So
okay, Mark, what do you watch? What do you read?
I will go to the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel website.
Great.
A lot.
I've really been enjoying
Excuse me?
It's really good.
I will occasionally read Politico based out of Washington, but I try to less and less because it just seems like a bunch of snobby reporters who think they have all the answers lecturing us from the bubble, and it's appealing to me less and less. I try and watch the local evening news as much as I can. And really those are the big ones.
Okay. One last question. And this is from an anonymous attendee who's not showing his or her face. Do Americans believe China is to blame for the COVID-19 virus and subsequent pandemic? Mark.
I think a good chunk of America believes that China is to blame for that. I think there is a chunk of America that believes that President Trump is to blame for it. And so if you are inclined to dislike the president, that's probably where your blame would lie. If you are inclined to like him, or in my view, even the middle of the road, I think it's hard not to, there's some serious skepticism of the motives of China and whether they did enough to contain it and whether or not they were honest brokers with the international community.
Heather?
So I guess I differentiate between whether you say whether, did the Chinese government do something actively to cause it, or is that where it started? I think most people think that's where it started. And I think that far fewer think that it was some sort of a conspiratorial thing or whatever. I think that no country has done a perfect job of dealing with this. I mean, there have been countries that have been closed and then reopened, and everybody's being held up like, oh, Sweden did a great job. Oh no, Sweden didn't do a great job. So I mean, I think that people point at China because I think largely they think that's like the locational genesis of it. I don't know that I agree with you, that Mark, that I think that most people think they did something nefarious.
There, we're going to have to wrap it up. Thank you both very much. It's been a really, really frank discussion. Thank you. It's been wonderful. Please do stay on the line if you want to join in the discussion afterwards. Our next discussion on Insight, part of this series, is on Monday, and that's with Ryan Tyson, who's a political, I think he's a pollster. And then we've got David Rancourt, who's a leading member of the Republican Party in Florida, and quite independent-minded as well. So you'll enjoy that. John Kampfner, the UK journalist, will also be talking on Tuesday. But don't forget, above all, our virtual tour, which starts tomorrow in Luzerne County in Pennsylvania. And after that, we'll be heading to Philadelphia on Friday, and then we'll be in North Carolina and Virginia after that. If you have not signed up for that virtual tour, please do. There are spaces, and we look forward to you joining us. My thanks again to Mark Jefferson and Heather Smith. Thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
It was fun.
Okay, bye-bye. Bye for now.